The rope burned her palms even through her work gloves as Violet Foster pulled down on the bell tower rope with all her might, and the deep bronze tone rang out across the dusty streets of San Andreas, New Mexico territory, calling the scattered faithful to Sunday morning service in the scorching summer of 1882. She had been ringing this bell every Sunday morning for 3 years now, ever since she turned 18, and Father McKenna had asked if she would take over the duty from old Mrs. Patterson, who had passed on to her eternal reward. Violet took pride in the task, arriving early each Sunday to make sure the bell rope was in good order and that she could ring it with the proper rhythm that let folks know it was time to gather for worship. The bell had been cast in Philadelphia and hauled all the way across the country by wagon train, a gift from wealthy donors back east who wanted to bring civilization to the frontier. Its tone was pure and strong, carrying across the adobe buildings and out into the surrounding desert where ranchers could hear it and know what time it was. She gave the rope another pull, counting out the rhythm in her head the way Father McKenna had taught her. 10 rings to start, then a pause, then 10 more. The sweat was already beginning to bead on her forehead despite the early hour. By noon, the temperature would be unbearable, but for now, the morning air still held a hint of coolness from the night before. Down below in the dusty street, she could see people beginning to make their way toward the little white church. Mrs. Henderson with her 3 children, all scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best. Old Tom Murphy limping along with his cane. The Martinez family in their wagon, the children bouncing in the back. This was her favorite part of Sunday, watching the community come together, knowing that her bell ringing helped gather them all in one place. Violet finished the final set of rings and secured the rope, then made her way carefully down the narrow ladder from the bell tower. Her cotton dress was already damp with perspiration, and she paused to smooth it down and adjust her bonnet before stepping out into the morning sunlight. The church was filling up nicely, and she slipped into her usual pew near the front, the one her family had occupied since the church was built 12 years ago. Her father sat beside her, his weathered face solemn as always. He ran the general store in town and was a respected member of the community, though not given to much conversation. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Violet was only 10, and since then it had been just the 2 of them. She kept house for him and helped in the store when needed, and he provided for her material needs. But there was a distance between them that had never quite been bridged. Father McKenna began the service, his Irish accent still thick despite 15 years in New Mexico. Violet tried to focus on his words, but her mind kept wandering. She was 21 now, and most girls her age were already married with children of their own. But there had never been anyone who caught her interest, no young man in San Andreas who made her heart beat faster. The town was small, maybe 300 souls, and she knew every eligible bachelor. There was Johnny Wright, who drank too much and had wandering hands. There was Peter Chen, whose family ran the laundry, but he had his eye on Sarah Mitchell. There was Miguel Rodriguez, but he was barely 16 and still wet behind the ears. She had begun to accept that she might remain unmarried, becoming one of those spinster women who devoted themselves to church work and caring for other people's children. It was not the life she had dreamed of as a young girl, but it was respectable and useful. The bell ringing gave her purpose, something that was hers alone. The service ended, and people filed out into the bright sunshine, gathering in little clusters to exchange gossip and news. Violet made her way back toward the bell tower to check that everything was secure for the week ahead. She was halfway up the ladder when she heard horses approaching at a fast clip, unusual for a Sunday morning when most folks were at their leisure. She climbed back down and stepped outside to see what the commotion was about. 3 riders had pulled up in front of the church, their horses lathered with sweat. They were cowboys from the look of them, dusty and trail-worn. The one in front swung down from his saddle and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and eyes so blue they were startling in his sun-bronzed face. "Pardon me, folks," he said, his voice carrying a Texas drawl. "We are looking for the doctor. We have got a man badly injured about 5 miles out. He got thrown from his horse and we think his leg is broken." Dr. Wilson pushed through the crowd. "I will get my bag. Where exactly is he?" The cowboy gave quick directions, and several men volunteered to ride out with the doctor to help bring the injured man back to town. Violet found herself staring at the cowboy who had spoken, noting the way he held himself with quiet confidence, the courtesy he showed in addressing the crowd. He caught her eye for just a moment and nodded politely before turning back to his horse. "Who are they?" she asked Mrs. Henderson, who knew everyone and everything that happened within 50 miles. "That's the crew from the Double G Ranch," Mrs. Henderson said. "Big spread about 15 miles north of here. Old Gerald Garrison passed away last winter and his son took over running the place. That's Frank Garrison right there, the one who did the talking. Good people, the Garrisons. They don't come into town much, being so far out, but they are honest and pay their debts. Frank Garrison." Violet repeated the name in her mind as she watched him ride off with the others. There was something about him that had caught her attention in a way no man ever had before. Maybe it was the competent way he handled the emergency, or the kindness in his eyes when he spoke, or simply the fact that he was someone new in her small, predictable world. She pushed the thoughts aside and went about her Sunday routine, having dinner with her father in their small house behind the general store, then reading for a while before going to bed early. But that night, she dreamed of blue eyes and a Texas drawl, and woke up feeling unsettled in a way she could not quite name. The week passed in its usual rhythm. She helped her father in the store, measuring out flour and sugar for customers, cutting fabric for the ladies who wanted to make new dresses, listening to the gossip that flowed through the shop like water. On Wednesday, Dr. Wilson came in for tobacco and mentioned that the cowboy who had been injured was recovering well at his boarding house, his legs set and splinted. "Those Double G boys came back to check on him yesterday," Dr. Wilson said. "Good outfit, that ranch. They take care of their people." Frank Garrison paid the medical bill in full and made sure his man had everything he needed. You don't always see that kind of loyalty. Violet's father grunted in agreement as he counted out change. She busied herself with straightening the tinned goods on the shelf, trying not to look too interested in the conversation. Saturday evening, she sat on the small porch of their house, enjoying the cooler air as the sun set over the desert. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that still took her breath away even after a lifetime of seeing them. She was shelling peas for tomorrow's dinner when she heard footsteps approaching. "Evening, Miss Foster." She looked up, startled to see Frank Garrison standing at the edge of her porch. He had his hat in his hands and looked freshly washed, his hair still damp and combed back from his face. "Mr. Garrison," she said, setting down the bowl of peas and standing up. "Good evening." "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said. "I wanted to thank you properly for the bell ringing last Sunday. It was that bell that helped us find the town so quick to get help for Tommy. Out there in the desert, sound carries, and we heard it clear as anything even though we were miles out. Might have saved his leg, the doctor said, getting him treated so fast." "I am glad I could help," Violet said, feeling her cheeks warm. "Though I was just doing what I do every Sunday, it is nothing special." It is special if it helps someone, Frank said. His eyes met hers, and she saw warmth and sincerity there. I have been meaning to come by all week, but we have been busy with the roundup. We are driving cattle to market next month, and there is a powerful lot of work to be done. I understand, Violet said. Would you like to sit down? I could get you some water or coffee if you are thirsty. Water would be mighty fine, thank you. She hurried inside, her heart beating faster than it should. When she returned with a glass of cool water from the pump, he was sitting on the porch step, looking out at the fading light. She handed him the glass and sat down in her chair, picking up the peas again to have something to do with her hands. This is a pretty spot, Frank said. You can see the whole sky from here. It is one of my favorite things about living here, Violet said. The sunsets are beautiful, and at night the stars are so bright it is like you could reach up and touch them. They talked easily as the light faded, about the weather and the town and the ranch. Frank had grown up on the Double G, he told her. His father had carved the ranch out of raw desert 40 years ago, running cattle and fighting off rustlers and Apaches, and every other hardship the frontier could throw at a man. Frank was 26 and had been running the ranch for the past 8 months, since his father's death. It is a big responsibility, he said quietly. Pa built that ranch with his bare hands, and now it is on me to keep it going. I've got 12 men working for me, and their families depend on the wages I pay them. Can't afford to make mistakes. It sounds like you are doing well, Violet said. Dr. Wilson said you take good care of your men. Only right, Frank said. A man works hard for you, you owe him fair treatment. That's what Pa always taught me. He stayed for more than an hour, and when he finally stood to leave, he turned to her with a shy smile that made him look younger. Would it be all right if I called on you again, Miss Foster? Properly, I mean, with your father's permission. I would like that, Violet said, hoping her voice sounded calm even though her heart was racing. My father is usually here in the evenings after he closes the store. Then I will come by tomorrow evening if that suits. After he left, Violet sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the desert and trying to understand the feelings swirling through her. She barely knew Frank Garrison, had spent only an hour in his company, but something had shifted in her world. For the first time, the future seemed to hold possibilities beyond the narrow confines of bell ringing and storekeeping. Sunday morning came with its usual routine. Violet climbed the ladder to the bell tower and pulled the rope, sending the clear bronze tone across the town. But this time, as she rang the bell, she found herself thinking of Frank's words about how the sound had helped them find the town. Her simple task had mattered in a real way, had helped save a man's leg. It made the bell ringing feel more significant, more connected to the wider world. After the service, Frank was waiting outside the church. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hat in hand, and he greeted her father with respectful courtesy. Mr. Foster, I would like to ask your permission to call on your daughter. Her father looked Frank up and down, his expression giving nothing away. You are the Garrison boy. Yes, sir. I run the Double G ranch north of town. I knew your father. He was a good man, honest in his dealings. I expect the same from you. Yes, sir, you will get nothing less from me. Her father nodded slowly. All right then, you can call on Violet. But I expect proper behavior and proper intentions. My daughter is not some saloon girl to be trifled with. I would never think such a thing, sir, Frank said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. I have only the highest respect for your daughter. Over the next few weeks, Frank came to town every Sunday after church and on Wednesday evenings, when he could get away from ranch work. They would sit on the porch and talk, or take walks through the town, always properly chaperoned by the presence of neighbors who kept a watchful eye on the young couple. Violet found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. The days between seemed to drag, filled with the ordinary tasks of her life, while the hours she spent with Frank flew by too quickly. He told her about ranch life, about the hard work of managing cattle and horses, about sleeping under the stars during roundup, and the satisfaction of seeing healthy calves born each spring. She told him about her mother's death, about growing up helping her father in the store, about her love of reading and the small library she had accumulated over the years. They discovered shared values and dreams, a similar outlook on life despite their different backgrounds. By August, Frank was holding her hand during their evening walks, and by September, he kissed her gently on the porch as the sun set over the desert. It was her first kiss, and it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "I am falling in love with you, Violet," he said softly, his forehead resting against hers. "I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." "I feel the same way," she whispered back. "I never thought I would feel like this about anyone." In October, as the weather finally began to cool and the leaves on the few cottonwood trees along the creek turned gold, Frank came to their house on a Sunday afternoon and asked to speak with her father privately. Violet waited in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to prepare coffee. She knew what Frank was going to ask, and she knew what her answer would be, but the moment felt enormous, life-changing. When her father called her into the parlor, both men were standing. Her father's expression was solemn as always, but there was something softer in his eyes than she usually saw. "Frank has asked for your hand in marriage," her father said. "I have given my consent, but the choice is yours, daughter. I will not force you into anything." Violet turned to Frank, who was watching her with hope and nervousness written across his face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank's face broke into a wide smile, and he crossed the room in 2 strides to take her hands in his. "You have made me the happiest man in New Mexico territory," he said. They set the wedding date for the first Sunday in December, giving them 2 months to prepare. It would be a simple ceremony in the church, where Violet had been ringing the bell all these years, with a reception afterward in the church hall. Frank wanted to wait until after the cattle drive to market, when he would have money to buy Violet a proper ring and to set up their household on the ranch. The news spread through town quickly, and Violet found herself the center of attention in a way she never had been before. The ladies of the church insisted on helping her make her wedding dress, and they gathered in the church hall on Wednesday afternoons to sew and gossip and offer advice about married life. Mrs. Henderson, who had been married for 25 years, was particularly free with her opinions. "Men are simple creatures," she said, threading a needle. "Keep them fed and loved and they will be happy, but don't let them take you for granted. Make sure Frank knows you are a partner, not a servant." Violet listened and absorbed it all, both nervous and excited about the life ahead of her. She had never lived anywhere but San Andreas, had never kept house for anyone but her father. The Double G Ranch was 15 miles away, too far for regular visits to town. She would be leaving behind everything familiar. But when Frank came to town on Wednesday evening and they sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out, all her doubts faded. This was right. He was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The cattle drive left in early November, and Frank would be gone for 3 weeks. The night before he left, he held her close in the shadows of the porch. "I am going to miss you something fierce," he said. "But when I get back, we will have the money to start our life together proper. I am going to buy you a ring in Santa Fe and some nice things for our home." "I don't need fancy things," Violet said. "I just need you. I know, but I want to give them to you anyway. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." He kissed her goodbye, and she watched him ride away in the early morning darkness, his horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. The weeks he was gone seemed endless. She threw herself into preparations for the wedding, sewing and planning, and trying not to worry about all the dangers that could befall a cattle drive. There were rustlers and storms and 100 other hazards that could strike. She rang the bell every Sunday morning with extra fervor, as if the sound could somehow reach across the miles and keep Frank safe. Each ring was a prayer, a hope cast out into the vast desert sky. The third week of November, word came that the cattle drive had been successful and the crew was on their way back. Violet could barely contain her excitement. On Wednesday afternoon, Frank rode into town, dusty and tired but grinning widely. He came straight to the store where she was helping her father stock shelves. "I am back," he announced unnecessarily, "and I have got something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a gold ring set with a small but beautiful diamond. "It is not the biggest ring in the world," he said, "but it is real and it is yours." Violet's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is beautiful," she said. "I love it." That Sunday, Violet climbed the ladder to the bell tower with a lightness in her step. In just one more week, she would be Mrs. Frank Garrison. She would ring the bell as usual today, and next Sunday she would ring it to call people to her own wedding. She pulled the rope, sending the familiar tone across the town. Down below, she could see Frank standing in the street, looking up at her. He waved and she waved back, happiness flooding through her. She finished the ringing and climbed down carefully, her feet finding the familiar rungs of the ladder. But when she was 3 rungs from the bottom, one of them gave way with a sharp crack. Violet fell, crying out in surprise and pain as she hit the floor of the bell tower hard. Her ankle twisted beneath her, and she felt something tear. Frank was up the tower steps in seconds, kneeling beside her. "Violet, are you all right?" "My ankle," she gasped, tears streaming down her face from the pain. "I think it is broken." He gathered her up carefully in his arms and carried her down the stairs. "Doctor." Wilson was fetched immediately, and he examined her ankle in the church hall while half the congregation looked on anxiously. "It is not broken," he announced finally, "but it is a bad sprain. You will need to stay off it completely for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. No walking at all." 2 weeks. That meant she would still be laid up for the wedding. Violet felt tears of frustration join the tears of pain. "But the wedding is next Sunday," she said. "Then we will postpone it," Frank said immediately, holding her hand. "Your health is more important than any date on a calendar." "But everything is ready," Violet protested. "The dress, the food, everything." "And it will all keep for a few more weeks," Frank said firmly. "I am not going to have you trying to stand on a bad ankle to marry me. We will wait until you are healed proper. Doctor." Wilson wrapped her ankle tightly and instructed her to keep it elevated and iced. Frank carried her home and settled her on the sofa with pillows under her foot. Her father stood in the doorway, looking more worried than she had seen him in years. "I am all right, Papa," she said. "Just clumsy." "That ladder has been getting old," her father said gruffly. "I should have checked it better." "It is nobody's fault," Frank said. "These things happen. The important thing is she will heal." He visited every day during her recovery, sitting beside her and reading to her from the books she loved or telling her stories about the ranch. Her father seemed to warm to him more during those weeks, seeing how Frank cared for Violet without expecting anything in return. "He is a good man," her father said to her one evening after Frank had left. "Like his father before him. You have chosen well, daughter." It was the closest her father had ever come to expressing affection, and Violet felt tears prick her eyes. By mid-December, her ankle was healing well. Dr. Wilson said she could walk carefully on it, though it would tire easily. They reset the wedding date for the last Sunday before Christmas, December 24th. A Christmas Eve wedding, Mrs. Henderson said approvingly. How romantic. The week before the wedding was a flurry of final preparations. The church was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbon. The ladies of the church prepared food for the reception. Violet's wedding dress was taken in slightly, as she had lost weight during her weeks of convalescence. On Saturday evening, Frank came to the house for what would be his last visit before the wedding. Tradition dictated that he should not see the bride on the day itself before the ceremony. "I can hardly believe this time tomorrow we will be married," he said, holding both her hands in his. "I have been dreaming of this for months." "So have I," Violet said. "Even when I thought I might never find someone to love, some part of me was hoping for you. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me," Frank promised. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the December air crisp and clean. Violet dressed carefully in her wedding gown, a simple but elegant dress of white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Henderson came to help her with her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style that Violet would never have managed on her own. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, tears in her eyes. "Like an angel." Her father knocked on the door, and when she opened it, she saw emotion in his face that took her breath away. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said quietly. "You look just like her on our wedding day." They made their way to the church slowly, mindful of Violet's still healing ankle. The church was full. It seemed like everyone in San Andreas had come to witness the wedding. Frank stood at the front with Father McKenna, and when he saw Violet walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her own eyes fill with tears. But something was wrong. As she drew closer, she realized that someone needed to ring the bell. In all the excitement and preparation, nobody had thought about who would ring the bell to start the ceremony. She had always been the one to do it, but obviously she could not ring the bell for her own wedding while walking down the aisle. She reached Frank's side and whispered urgently, "The bell." Nobody rang the bell. Frank looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. He turned to Father McKenna. "Father, would you excuse us for just a moment?" Before anyone could protest, Frank took Violet's hand and led her back down the aisle and through the door to the bell tower stairs. "What are you doing?" she asked, bewildered. "We are going to ring the bell together," he said. "This is your church, your bell. You have rung it faithfully for 3 years. Let's ring it together now." They climbed the stairs carefully, Frank supporting her weight. When they reached the bell tower, he took hold of the rope and motioned for her to put her hands over his. "Together," he said. They pulled the rope together and the bell rang out across San Andreas, clear and strong. Once, twice, 3 times. Then Frank turned to her, still holding the rope, and said with a grin, "Ring it for our wedding next Sunday." "Frank, this is Sunday," she said, laughing through happy tears. "This is our wedding right now." "I know," he said. "But I have been wanting to say that to you for months, and I just did not get the chance. So I am saying it now. Ring this bell for our wedding. Ring it because we are getting married and we are going to be happy, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." She kissed him then, properly scandalous in the bell tower before they were even officially married, but she did not care. They rang the bell together one more time, a joyful peal that echoed across the desert. When they came back down to the church, everyone was standing and looking confused. Frank led Violet back down the aisle to her place, and Father McKenna smiled knowingly. "Shall we begin?" he asked. The ceremony was beautiful. Violet had thought she might be nervous, but standing beside Frank, holding his hands and looking into his eyes, she felt only peace and rightness. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When Father McKenna pronounced them man and wife and Frank kissed her, the congregation erupted in applause. The reception in the church hall was lively and joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Frank waltzed Violet carefully around the floor, mindful of her ankle but unable to suppress his happiness. Everyone wanted to congratulate them and wish them well. As the sun began to set, Frank helped Violet into the wagon he had brought to carry them back to the ranch. Her few belongings were already packed in the back, along with wedding gifts from the townspeople. Her father stood on the church steps, and Violet climbed down to hug him goodbye. "Be happy, daughter," he said gruffly, "and come visit when you can." "I will, Papa, I promise." The ride to the Double G Ranch took about 2 hours, and darkness had fallen by the time they arrived. But the ranch house was lit up with lanterns, and Frank's ranch hands had decorated the porch with pine boughs in honor of the occasion. They cheered when Frank carried Violet over the threshold, and she laughed at the tradition. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," Frank said, setting her down gently in the parlor. The house was simple but comfortable, built of adobe with wooden floors and a large fireplace. Frank had cleaned and prepared it for her arrival, and she could see touches that showed his care. Fresh curtains at the windows, a rug on the floor, wildflowers in a vase on the table, dried now in the winter cold but still beautiful. "It is wonderful," she said. "It is perfect." They spent their first night as husband and wife in the big bedroom at the back of the house, and Violet discovered the joy and intimacy of married love. Frank was gentle and patient, and she felt cherished and desired in a way she never had before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and the distant sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "Are you happy?" Frank asked softly. "More than I ever imagined I could be," Violet answered honestly. The first weeks of married life were an adjustment. Violet had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, so different from town living. She woke early to make breakfast for Frank and the ranch hands who ate at the house. She learned to cook for a dozen hungry men, to manage supplies and make do when the weather made trips to town impossible. She learned the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, the calls of the men as they went about their work. Frank was patient with her learning process, never criticizing when she burned the biscuits or oversalted the stew. He included her in ranch decisions, asking her opinion about purchases and planning. He made sure she had time to read and rest, understanding that she needed solitude sometimes after a lifetime of quiet routines. Winter passed into spring, and Violet settled into her new life. She missed the bell ringing sometimes, missed the community of San Andreas, but Frank took her to town every Sunday for church so she could see her father and friends. Someone else rang the bell now, a young girl named Mary Thompson, but Violet found she did not mind. That was part of her old life. Her new life was here with Frank. In March, she realized she was pregnant. Dr. Wilson confirmed it when they made a special trip to town, and Frank's joy was boundless. He became even more protective, insisting she not overwork herself, making sure she ate well and rested often. "I am not made of glass," she protested with a laugh. "Women have babies every day." "But you are my wife carrying my child," he said. "That makes it different." Their son was born in November, a healthy baby boy with Frank's blue eyes and a powerful set of lungs. They named him Samuel, after Frank's father. Violet had never known love like she felt holding her newborn son, looking down at his tiny, perfect face while Frank sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "We made him," Frank said in wonder. "We made a whole new person." "We did," Violet agreed, tears of joy streaming down her face. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Samuel grew from a baby to a toddler, running around the ranch house and getting into everything. Violet became pregnant again, and their daughter Grace was born when Samuel was 2. Then another son, Robert, when Grace was 18 months old. The ranch prospered under Frank's management. He bought more land, increased the herd, built a better barn and bunkhouse for the hands. Violet kept the books for the ranch, discovering she had a head for numbers and business. They made a good team, working together to build a legacy for their children. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Frank surprised her by arranging for them to spend a night in San Andreas with Mrs. Henderson watching the children. They stayed at the boarding house and had dinner at the hotel, a rare luxury. After dinner, Frank took her hand and led her to the church. It was dark and empty, the Sunday services long since over. "What are we doing here?" Violet asked. Frank lit a lantern and handed it to her, then led her to the bell tower stairs. They climbed up together, and when they reached the top, Frank took the rope in his hands. "I thought you might like to ring your bell one more time," he said, "for old time's sake." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. She put her hands over his on the rope, and together they pulled. The bell rang out across the sleeping town, deep and clear, the sound she knew so well. They rang it 3 times, then stood in the darkness of the tower, holding each other. "I love you, Violet Garrison," Frank said. "I loved you the first moment I saw you in that church 5 years ago, and I love you more now than I did then. You have made my life complete." "And you have made mine," Violet said. "I used to ring this bell and think my life would never change, that I would always be alone. And then you rode into town and everything became possible. You gave me love and a family and a future. You gave me everything." They kissed in the bell tower, surrounded by the fading echoes of the bell, and Violet felt the circle of her life complete. She had rung this bell faithfully for 3 years, never knowing it would lead her to the love of her life. And now, 5 years married with 3 children and a ranch to run, she knew that every ring had been worth it. Every Sunday morning climbing those stairs had been leading her toward this moment, toward this man, toward this life. They returned to the ranch the next day, to their children and their responsibilities, but Violet carried the memory of that night in the bell tower close to her heart. It reminded her that life could surprise you, that love could find you even when you had stopped looking, that faith and duty and showing up every week to ring a bell could lead to miracles. More years passed. Samuel grew into a strong boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to be a cowboy like his father. Grace was gentle and bookish, reminding Violet of herself as a child. Robert was the wild one, always getting into mischief and making them laugh. They had 2 more children, twin girls named Martha and Rose, born when Violet was 30. The ranch continued to prosper. Frank took on more hands, built a new house to replace the original adobe structure, though Violet insisted they keep the old house standing for memories. They became one of the most successful ranches in New Mexico territory, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. Violet's father grew old and eventually could not manage the store anymore. He sold it and came to live with them on the ranch, spending his final years surrounded by grandchildren and the wide desert sky he had always loved. He died peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 12, and they buried him in the San Andreas Cemetery next to Violet's mother. San Andreas grew and changed over the years. The railroad came through in 1895, bringing more people and commerce. The town that had been a sleepy desert outpost when Violet was a girl became a thriving small city. But the church remained, and the bell continued to ring every Sunday morning, calling the faithful to worship. Violet went to church every Sunday when she could, though the journey became harder as she grew older. She would sit in the pew and listen to the bell ring, remembering the feel of the rope in her hands, the weight of the responsibility, the Sunday morning when Frank had ridden into town and changed her life forever. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Frank organized a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew. Their children were grown now, Samuel already married with a child of his own. Grace was engaged to a nice young man from Santa Fe. Robert was working the ranch alongside his father, and the twins were finishing school. Mrs. Henderson, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, cornered Violet during the party. "You have done well, dear," she said. "Better than any of us expected when you were that quiet girl ringing the bell every Sunday." "I had no idea my life would turn out like this," Violet admitted. "I thought I would live and die in my father's house." "But you had faith," Mrs. Henderson said. "You showed up every week and did your duty, and the Lord rewarded you. That's how it works, you know. Faithfulness leads to blessings." Later that night, after all the guests had left and the children were in bed, Frank and Violet sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out over the desert. It was the same view that had enchanted Violet as a young woman, but now she saw it with the wisdom of middle age and the contentment of a life well lived. "You ever regret it?" Frank asked. "Marrying me and coming out here. You could have had an easier life in town." "Never," Violet said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly who I was meant to be with." Frank took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar way of long married couples. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "To have found you, to have built this life with you. It has been better than I ever dreamed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, secure in their love and their life together. More years passed. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Frank's health began to decline. Grace had 4 children and lived happily in Santa Fe with her husband, a lawyer. Robert married a girl from town and built a house on the far end of the ranch property. The twins both became teachers, Martha in San Andreas and Rose in Albuquerque. Violet became a grandmother many times over, and she loved nothing more than when all her children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for holidays and celebrations. The house would be full of noise and laughter and love, everything she had dreamed of in her lonely years as a girl. On a Sunday morning in the spring of 1907, Violet woke to find Frank still asleep beside her. It was late, much later than he usually slept, and for a moment she felt a spike of fear. But then she saw his chest rise and fall, heard his steady breathing, and relaxed. He was just tired. They both were. Getting old was exhausting. She dressed quietly and made her way to the kitchen, where Samuel's wife was already preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mama Violet," she said. "Papa Frank still sleeping?" "Yes, let him rest. He has earned it." They went to church that morning, the whole family crowding into 3 wagons for the journey to San Andreas. Frank was quiet during the ride, holding Violet's hand but not saying much. In the church, they sat in the same pew where Violet had sat as a girl, where she had sat beside her father before she knew Frank existed. The bell rang to start the service, and Violet listened to its familiar tone with deep contentment. That bell had shaped her life in ways she could never have imagined. It had brought Frank to her, had given her purpose during her lonely years, had marked the rhythm of her weeks for so long. Even now, years after she had stopped ringing it herself, its sound filled her with peace. After the service, they stood outside in the sunshine, talking with old friends and neighbors. Father McKenna had retired years ago, and the new priest was a young man from Baltimore, but he knew the story of Violet and the bell and always made her feel welcome. Frank was tiring, she could see, so they made their goodbyes and headed back to the ranch. That evening he was quiet at dinner, eating little. Violet worried but did not press him. After 42 years of marriage, she knew when to give him space. That night they lay in bed together, Frank holding her close. "I love you, Violet," he said softly. "I have loved you every day since I first saw you." "I love you too," she said. "Always." He kissed her forehead and fell asleep with his arms around her. In the morning he did not wake up. He had died peacefully in the night, his heart simply stopping after 73 years of life. Violet's grief was profound. After more than 4 decades together, she did not know how to be without Frank. Her children gathered around her, supporting her through the funeral and the difficult weeks that followed. They buried Frank in the San Andreas Cemetery, and the whole town turned out to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. The weeks after his death were the hardest of Violet's life. She wandered through the ranch house they had shared, seeing him everywhere, missing him with an ache that never quite went away. But slowly, with the support of her children and grandchildren, she found a way to live with the grief. She knew Frank would not want her to give up, to stop living just because he was gone. Samuel ran the ranch now, with Robert's help, and they were doing a fine job. Violet stepped back from the daily operations, spending her time with her grandchildren and her books. She was 66 years old, and while she was healthy and strong, she knew her own time was growing shorter. She went to church every Sunday, listening to the bell ring and remembering. Sometimes she would go up to the bell tower after the service, climbing the stairs slowly now, her joints stiff with age. She would stand in the small space where she had spent so many Sunday mornings as a girl, where Frank had taken her on their wedding day to ring the bell together. The rope was the same, though frayed with age. The bell was the same, its tone as clear as ever. One Sunday morning, 5 years after Frank's death, Violet woke with a strange feeling of peace and completion. She dressed carefully, putting on her best dress, and made the journey to San Andreas with Samuel and his family. During the service, she felt Frank's presence beside her, almost as real as if he were sitting in the pew. After the service, she asked Samuel to help her up to the bell tower one last time. He looked concerned, but she smiled and patted his arm. "I just want to see it once more, dear. Humor an old woman." They climbed the stairs together, Samuel supporting her weight. When they reached the tower, Violet stood for a long moment, looking at the bell that had shaped her life so profoundly. "Can I ring it?" she asked. "Of course, Mama." She took the rope in her hands, feeling its familiar texture, the weight of it. She pulled, and the bell rang out, clear and strong, carrying across San Andreas just as it had for decades. She rang it 3 times, the same number she and Frank had rung on their wedding night. "Thank you," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to the bell or to God or to Frank or to all 3. Violet lived another 15 years, dying peacefully at the age of 86, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She had lived a long, full life, rich with love and purpose. They buried her next to Frank in the San Andreas Cemetery, under the wide New Mexico sky they had both loved. The bell in the San Andreas church still rings every Sunday morning. It has rung for over 100 years now, calling the faithful to worship, marking births and deaths and weddings and all the moments that make up a community. And if you listen closely on a quiet Sunday morning, some people say you can still hear the echo of a young woman's faithful ringing. and the joy of a cowboy who found love in a dusty desert town so many years ago. The Double G Ranch still operates today, run by Samuel's grandson, Frank's great-grandson. He named his own son Frank, keeping the name alive, honoring the man who built the ranch and loved his wife so well. The old adobe house still stands, preserved now as a reminder of the past, and sometimes family members go there to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, remembering the stories of Violet and Frank and the life they built together. In the San Andreas Church, there is a small plaque on the wall near the bell tower stairs. It reads, "In memory of Violet Foster Garrison, who rang this bell faithfully for 3 years and whose life exemplified service, faith, and love." Church members read it sometimes and wonder about the woman whose name is preserved there, about what her life was like, about the love story that started with a bell and a cowboy and a wedding promise. The truth is, Violet's life was extraordinary precisely because it was so ordinary. She was not famous or powerful. She did not change the course of history or leave a grand legacy. But she loved well and lived faithfully, and she found happiness in the simple act of showing up every Sunday to ring a bell. That faithfulness led her to love, and that love created a family, and that family continues to this day, carrying forward the values of honesty and hard work and devotion that Violet and Frank lived by. On the last Sunday of every year, the San Andreas Church has a special tradition. After the regular service ends, they invite anyone who wants to come up and ring the bell themselves. Young and old, long-time residents and newcomers, they all take a turn pulling the rope and sending the clear tone across the town. It is a reminder that we are all part of something larger than ourselves, that our simple acts of faithfulness matter, that showing up and doing our duty can lead to blessings we never imagined. And if you ask the oldest residents of San Andreas, the ones who remember stories their grandparents told, they will say that the bell sounds sweetest on those special Sundays, as if it is remembering Violet Foster and her cowboy Frank, and the love story that started with faithful ringing and ended with a life so full of joy, it still echoes through the generations. The desert wind blows across the cemetery where Violet and Frank lie side by side, their headstones weathered now but still standing. The inscription on Violet's stone, chosen by her children, reads simply, "She rang the bell faithfully, and love answered." On Frank's stone, he kept his promises and loved well. Together, even in death, they tell the story of two people who found each other against the odds, who built a life of meaning and purpose, who raised children and grandchildren who carry their legacy forward. The sun sets over New Mexico, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the same colors Violet loved as a girl. The bell in San Andreas Church stands silent now, waiting for Sunday morning when it will ring again, calling the faithful, marking the time, echoing the story of a woman who showed up every week to do her duty, and found in that simple act of faithfulness the great love of her life and a future more beautiful than any dream.